As your host of this program is an early morning riser, and generally I have an alarm clock set shortly after 3. Actually, this morning woke up right on the dot at 3 o'clock and decided close enough, I'll get up and I'll start getting ready for the program. I go to bed really early. On the other hand, I sometimes, when you're post 40 and you're a man, sometimes you have to get up in the middle of the night. Sometimes you have to get up a couple of times in the middle of the night, which I did. I got up at one point, it must have been about 20 after 9, and I checked the results coming in from New Hampshire, which was 11:20 East Coast. And by that time, you started to get a really good idea of how things were playing out there. Is anybody surprised? Bill O'Reilly said it well last night on his program. The polls were correct. The polls, in other words, were right this time, unlike some of what we've seen in recent years where they couldn't seem to get a lot of the details right. But Donald Trump was expected to have a big win among Republicans. Bernie Sanders expected to have a big win among Democrats. And yes, both of those things happened. What's interesting, a few pundits today are mentioning Ted Cruz, who was projected to finish fifth or sixth, came in third. And I just went through the county maps of New Hampshire, interactive maps. Cruz did very well in the Boston suburbs. That is southeastern New Hampshire. You wouldn't think that a guy who is a conservative from Texas and an evangelical would do that well with a bunch of Boston suburbanites, but he finished second in most of those counties. But he finished third overall. Now, last week, when Marco Rubio finished third in Iowa, the media immediately proclaimed him the victor. They like Marco Rubio. Oh, gosh, he's handsome and he's malleable and he was part of the Gang of Eight. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, finishes third, and it's no mention of any moral or strategic victory by coming in third, which should tell you a little bit of what you need to know, if not all of what you need to know, about establishment media in this country. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, we spent some time, about half an hour on the program yesterday, talking about Trump and whether or not he is for real. Now, I posted that YouTube video from that half hour of the show yesterday on Facebook. I have a lot of friends out there who are diehard Trump supporters, and they look at anything that doesn't cheerlead for Donald Trump as being an attack on Donald Trump. And I tell you what, one of them's a former coworker. Mr. Rogers is his name. No relation to the guy who used to host the children's show. In fact, their styles on air would be considered radically different, polar opposites. But Mr. Rogers criticizes me every time for not being on the Trump bandwagon, and I'd raise the question, is Trump potentially, a plant? Now, I didn't sit here and say that he was. I raised the question. I think it's good to have that discussion still early in this process. But there are times when Donald Trump speaks and I sit back and say, well, I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe he is the guy. Take a listen to some of his remarks during his 14-and-a-half-minute victory speech last night. He doesn't drone on for 40 or 50 or 60 like some of these candidates do in this situation. He keeps it somewhat brief. He offered thank yous for about the first 3 to 4 minutes, not only of his family. He thanked his late parents. He said that he hoped they were looking down on heaven and appreciative of what he has done. And for the first time, I think, in one of these situations, he actually came across as being very human, in the sense that he has those same feelings about family and departed relatives that the rest of us have. And he also mentioned, he congratulated his fellow Republicans and said that his fellow Republicans, were basically good people. And you wonder if this is a change in tone now that he may run the table when it comes to these primaries, if this is a change in tone that will continue. But take a listen for a moment, because liberals don't like it when Donald Trump talks about how we're going to win economically by defeating some of our economic rivals.
When I came out, I heard the end of Bernie's speech, and I heard some of the beginning. No. First of all, congratulations to Bernie. In all fairness, we have to congratulate him. We may not like it, but I heard parts of Bernie's speech. He wants to give away our country, folks. He wants to give away. We're not going to let it happen. We're not going to let it happen. I don't know where it's going with Bernie. We wish him a lot of luck, but we are going to make America great again, but we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to beat China, Japan. We're going to beat Mexico at trade. We're going to beat all of these countries that are taking so much of our money away from us.
This morning at a magazine called Vox, which is a very left-leaning publication, and it is headed up by a man named Ezra Klein. Well, he's a fellow of questionable manhood. He was one of the founders of that organization called Journalist a few years ago. that essentially were people in media who got together and conspired to make Barack Obama look good in order to further their own socialist goals. He said today, criticized Trump, saying Trump is the most dangerous man in American politics and perhaps in American political history. I guess he's forgetting Huey Long. If you're thinking about someone who's similar in their approach to politics, it was Huey Long, the former governor of Louisiana, who unfortunately met a terrible end, and many people believe it was because Huey Long was tipping over the apple cart of the establishment. We would hope that that wouldn't happen here. But Klein went on to say that Trump shouldn't have to talk about an economy growing here by going up against our economic rivals. Look, folks, the Chinese aren't worried about a level field with the United States. They're worried about being number one. That's what, and so all Trump is saying is it is competitive. And Lefty doesn't want to acknowledge that. 8:13, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. I have a few other clips here from Trump as well, and I'm going to try to jump around a little bit in the speech and share some of them. But he went on to criticize big money that's funding other candidates. Clearly, he doesn't need it.
These are special interests, folks. These are lobbyists. These are people that don't necessarily love our country. They don't have the best interests of our country at heart. We're not going to let it happen. We can't. We have to do something about it. When you see the kind of deals made in our country, a lot of those deals are made because the politicians aren't so stupid. They're making them for their benefit. We have to stop it. We have to stop it. We are now going to make it for your benefit. We're going to make the deals for the American people. That's the way it is.
Now, last night, Bernie Sanders, who's the other fellow who doesn't take any huge contributions from lobbyists, was actually begging on stage during his victory speech for people to send him small donations. On the other hand, if Goldman Sachs sat down and got a couple of thousand employees each to send Bernie $20 a month, would that then be considered a big donation from Goldman Sachs? That's a question we'll have to answer perhaps at a later moment. Mr. Trump then got back to one of the issues that really has made his campaign, and that is the southern border. And he linked it to the drug trade, illegal drug trade in this country, and the number of heroin deaths that are taking place in many of our states.
We're going to build a wall. It's going to be built. It's not even, believe it or not, it's not even a difficult thing to do. And by the way, for the people of New Hampshire, where you have a tremendous problem with heroin and drugs, you wouldn't even believe it. You see this place and you say it's so beautiful. You have a tremendous problem. The first thing always that they mention to me, Mr. Trump, please do something. The drugs, the heroin, it's pouring in, and it's so cheap because there's so much of it. And the kids are getting stuck, and other people are getting stuck. We're going to end it. We're going to end it. We're going to end it at the southern border. It's going to be over.
I'm waiting for all of the New York Times editorialists to start writing, oh dear, oh my, he called Mexicans drug dealers. Oh, you mean like El Chapo? Well, yeah, but that's only one. Oh, you mean like the Escobar? Oh, he's dead. You can't know. So remember when they said he was calling Mexican immigrants? He was talking about illegal aliens. He was calling them rapists and killers. He qualified that. He said not all, but some. See, media doesn't want you to remember that part. But that guy who killed that beautiful young woman in San Francisco, well, there you go. That backs up what Trump says. Some of these people are killers. Some of them are dope dealers. Some of them are very nefarious people. They walk around with tattoos that say MS-13 and they'll kill you for looking cross-eyed at them. And Lefty says, yeah, but we wouldn't want to hurt their feelings, so let them deal their drugs because they have been oppressed people. And this is because we have been their oppressors. If the heroin kills us, well, gosh, we deserve it. 8:16, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 22 right now on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. So I'm listening to all of this from Trump last night, and I'm thinking, I'm still not sold on the guy. But this clip here, this is what really I think it resonates with me, and I think it resonates with many of those people who showed up to actually vote for him.
We're getting rid of Common Core. We're going to educate our children locally. We educate our children locally. We are going to preserve our very sacred Second Amendment. There's not going to be any more chipping away at our Second Amendment. If we had protection in California recently and so many other places, you could even look to Paris. Paris has the toughest gun laws in the world. France has the toughest gun laws in the world. These animals go in, they start shooting 1, 2, 3, 130 people, with many people horribly wounded right now in the hospital. If there were bullets going in the other direction, believe me, it would have been a whole different story, folks. But nobody had protection.
He is starting, I think, more and more to sound like a serious candidate when I hear comments like that coming out of his mouth. Could I just mention very quickly? I just looked at my monitor, my screen here on Fox News. Trey Gowdy is making an appearance right now. Gowdy has been a man backing Marco Rubio. And of course, Rubio last night did not do well. So the media puffing up after Iowa didn't seem to help. But I just noticed it appears Trey Gowdy has finally found a good barber. It's only taken him about half a dozen years serving in the House of Representatives. Maybe he's actually going to the House barber. I don't know, but his hair for a change is actually it's not popping up in 16 directions. I mean, I know what that's like. I wear a hat every day for that very reason. We have to mention coming up in a few minutes on the show, just after the 8:30 break, we're going to be joined by a medical professional from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. It's located, in fact, directly across from the main post office on Fillmore Street. We do this every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We're joined by either the doctor or we're joined by one of his associates at the office, and we break down a particular medical issue. We also take some of your telephone calls. Keep in mind, your calls don't have to deal with just specifically that the issue that we're talking about that particular day. So if the doctor is talking about gout, but you've got an issue with your kidneys, the doctor is more than willing to answer that question too as well. So we encourage you to give us a call during that segment of the show. I also like to point out that we're going to have a couple of visits from Tripp Family Medicine this week. On a very special note, on Friday morning, the doctor is going to join us in studio as well, and we're going to focus that discussion entirely on what's called the Zika virus and what you should know about it. Is it as bad as it's being portrayed in media, or, can your normal precautions help you out in the face of this disease, which the World Health Organization says could quickly turn into a worldwide pandemic? We have a break coming up in just a moment. Also want to mention, I looked at an interactive map. If I didn't mention this earlier, maybe I did. I looked at an interactive map at the Guardian website this morning of New Hampshire. Bernie Sanders won every county in the state. Donald Trump won every county in that state. These weren't just victories, my friends, because New Hampshire is not a huge state, but it borders Canada on one end, it borders Massachusetts on another, it borders Maine, it borders Vermont. So culturally, you've got several different groups there. And yet, every county in the state either went for Trump or it went for Sanders, depending on which primary was taking place. We've got plenty more coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 23 at 8:20. Has anybody seen that photograph? It's been making the rounds. Chris Christie giving a big hug to Hillary Clinton. Now, this is the same guy just before the 2012 election who raced up and gave Barack Obama a big hug when Mr. Obama came to tour the damage after Hurricane Sandy. And many people say it was that embrace that gave Mr. Obama the election over Mitt Romney. Christie didn't like Romney anyway. When he was selected to give the big address at the convention, he actually got up and talked about himself and not Mitt. He has a history of hugging Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. You may remember Mr. Christie a couple of years ago jumping up and down in the Cowboys owner's box and giving Mr. Jones a big hug. Last week, while he was on set at CNN, he got up to leave, and Mrs. Clinton came in for the next segment, and there's a photograph of the two in a big embrace. Even her husband doesn't like to do that with her. But here's Chris Christie, and Mr. Christie is hinting that perhaps it's time for him to go home following his dismal performance yesterday.
Because so many New Hampshire residents came out to vote today, it's going to take a while to count these votes. So we want to see exactly what happens. And so we're going to go home to New Jersey to wait. By tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, we should know. We should know what the vote count is, and that's going to allow us to make a decision about how we move from here in this race.
I got better things to do, in other words. I don't like losing, and I'll go home and I'll figure out something else, and maybe they'll make me Attorney General after the Republicans clean up next November. 825, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Clearly, no one defied expectations too much last night, and people may have a thought on that or two. It does appear at the moment that Trump could be an unstoppable force, and maybe people have some thoughts on that. I know there are people out there who are not big Trump fans. How, at this stage of the game, would you stop him, though? There's a question for you, 736-0300. I also like to mention our good friends at High Desert Meat Processing here in Twin Falls, where they process one animal at a time. What you bring in is exactly what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing, has been doing this for nearly 35 years. You can visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook and read reviews of other customers, or give High Desert Meat Processing a telephone call for all of your wild game and your domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats such as jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, kielbasa, breakfast sausage, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. We are 27 days away from a primary here in the state of Idaho. Presidential primary for the Republican and, get this, the Constitution Party. Constitution Party has 3 names on its ballot. I don't know that there are a lot of people who are members of that party in Idaho. The Democrats will not caucus here until sometime in late March. I believe by the time we get to Idaho, now the big SEC primary, that's the Southeast Conference, it's jokingly called primary, in many of the southern states is the week before. And I think we're going to be down to just 2 Republican candidates at that point. Donald Trump and then this fellow.
That a conservative, we were told, could not do well in the state of New Hampshire. We were told that over and over again, and tonight the men and women here and all across this great state proved them wrong.
Ted Cruz speaking, and we pointed out earlier, he finished third. He wasn't supposed to. He was supposed to be 5th or 6th. Third place finish in media parlance should mean he's the victor. That's what they declared Marco Rubio last week after Rubio came in third, a very close third, to Donald Trump's second in Iowa. Albeit Trump had not expected to win Iowa, and it was only a very brief period that he led in the polls there. Andrea Mitchell speaking over at MSDNC last night. They had all of the women on set. They're all angry that their girl lost, and Mrs. Clinton lost by 22 points total. I mean, it was, even though it was expected that she would lose, that is a huge margin in a primary, even if the other guy is from the state next door. Andrea Mitchell expressing her concern that this is also very bad for Hillary Clinton's husband.
Watching him watch her these last few days when they've been campaigning together, because previously he was on his own and as a surrogate, just watching his face, he could not mask the recognition that, oh my, this is happening again. Yeah. She's going to lose.
Yeah, and as I said in what we call the tease before the program started, there's a little bit. Margaret Hamilton, do you know the name? She sold coffee for many years, did TV commercials for Maxwell House. She was known as Cora. She ran a country store and she sold. But before that, she was a Hollywood actress. And you would recognize her. She had a green face, long bony fingers, and she wore a big black pointed hat. And eventually she accidentally got doused with water by Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and all of a sudden she screamed, "I'm melting!" and melted down to nothing. You almost could see that with Hillary Clinton last night. I was expecting Clinton would come out on stage, and all of a sudden she would just start to shrivel up into a puddle, and I'm melting! They're very much going to be looking to give Bernie Sanders the business over the next few weeks and trying to portray him as either a sexist or, I don't know, maybe they're anti-Semites in the Clinton camp. Remember, they attacked Obama. They went down to South Carolina, and Bill Clinton said, "I tell you, years ago, that fellow would have been pouring our drinks for us." And then I would have called him boy, and I would have had him drive my mom to the grocery store and pick a little cotton. I didn't really say that, did I? I hope nobody heard me over there in the media. But this is what's going to happen now. They're going to attack Bernie Sanders in any way they can. And if it comes down to his religious faith, they'll do that as well if they figure it'll score him some points. Hey, Trip Family Medicine coming up in just a few minutes right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX.